Shalosio Yatzarel. It's your brother, your cousin, your nephew, young Aniyun Wiya, reporting live on behalf of the Master of Breath, Hisakere Messi, the Great Spirit, Wakonda. For starters, this is presidential debate coverage. I'm just trying to do a breakdown on the first, second, and fourth questions that were asked in the presidential debate. So those questions have to do with the cost of living. That's first. And then the tariffs that Donald Trump has proposed, and then the immigration issue. Although immigration keeps coming up over and over throughout the whole thing. The reason why I want to even do an analysis of their responses to those questions in the first place is because I'm a part of two communities within the black community, sub-communities if you will, that are frequently very reticent when it comes to sharing their political opinions on the most important platforms in the American discourse today. And I feel like there's nothing but excuses being used to avoid rendering those opinions. The two communities in question that I'm talking about, the black indigenous community and the black Hebrew Israelite community. The black Hebrew Israelite community, they often talk about not wanting to weigh in on politics a lot of the time, or even vote, because of this notion that the Bible basically tells them not to involve themselves in the folly of the politics or government of the oppressor in their captivity. In my opinion, you can only come to that conclusion with very selective reading of the New Testament. But then you've also got the black indigenous community who boils it down to neither party is really a respecter of persons anyway. They're not going to care about what we want done. So there's no point in voting. There's no point in being a part of this system. There's no point in contributing. There's no point in using my voice. Here's my thing. If you're indigenous, the thing is, this is your land, and the government that is making all the decisions in your country is in your country as immigrants. To your land, to your country. And so they are doing this in a process that should defer more so to your opinion than to anyone else's first. I think all of these are just excuses to avoid having to deal with something you don't know much about, and you don't want to show your hand about the fact that you have a lot of ignorance in this area, so you decide not to deal with it at all. But there's one exception in the black indigenous community to this as far as content creators goes, and that is Dane Calloway. Dane Calloway has actually been very vocal in his support for Donald Trump. He's black, he identifies as indigenous, and he is someone who is very supportive of Donald Trump whenever he gets the chance. We're going to take a look at some things that he has said later in the video. So I want to kind of do as fair and objective a breakdown of the debate as possible. I want to deal with what the candidates said in as even-handed a way as possible. But I still want to find some way to contextualize this in the black Indian Hebrew Israelite milieu, and I feel that I'm uniquely positioned to do that because I do identify as a black Hebrew Israelite, Tanakh only. So I'm not a proponent of the New Testament. And I am also a descendant through multiple bloodlines of indigenous people. My great-grandmother on my mother's side, my maternal great-grandmother, grew up on the res. She was Muskogee, and until she was a teenager, she grew up on the res, and then they moved to Tennessee. She married a Cherokee, and then And these were people in an area where that was still being settled very slowly. An area that had previously been Yuchi land that the Cherokee took over. It's called Hogohegi, but now we know it as Savannah, Tennessee, and it's still remote even now. And they moved back also because they had an opportunity to get land there, and they got land. Anyway, also on my father's side, my paternal grandmother, her family was Hichiti. And that's another Creek Indian nation. So yeah, I'm Creek. From both of those directions. I'm also Cherokee, which hence the name Aniunwiya. So I'm, and there's more beyond that. But in addition to being indigenous, I am also a Black Hebrew Israelite, as I said, and I was a reporter for covering politics and government and business for about 7 years, and I'm an ethno-journalist today, and I feel that I'm that these things in tandem make me uniquely qualified to provide a perspective that's not being provided. Again, we're looking at the first, second, and fourth question of the debate, and I'm considering very strongly doing a follow-up video where I tackle some of the other questions from the debate as well. There's no way to do the whole debate in one video, or even two, because, I mean, the debate was hella long, so who's got time for all that? Anyways, we're just going to try and see which of these candidates is bullshitting the most, and I want to make sure that no matter what your political or religious beliefs are, no matter what the color of your skin, and no matter what your political and religious leanings are, whether you're agnostic or Christian or Muslim or whatever, I think all of this is valuable to all of you. Anyway, first question was really embedded into the context of cost of living, because that is the polls suggest that is everyone's top concern right now. Which does make sense. So in that context, the first question was addressed to Kamala Harris, because Donald Trump won the coin toss. Addressed to Kamala Harris, the question was, when it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago? So the Vice President started kind of giving this sentimental backstory of her upbringing in a middle-class family with a family friend who was a small business owner, and all of these things, just kind of, the thing candidates always do to make themselves seem more American than the other candidate. She also ends up acknowledging the, quote, shortage of homes and housing, that's how she phrased it, and the, quote, cost of housing as too expensive. So she's acknowledging these things. She's acknowledging these things, which she should. Both candidates should. They're realities in America today, right? And so she takes a very long time. She's very long-winded getting to her solutions, but she does eventually get to her solutions. There's two that she hangs her hat on in her answer, which is a child tax credit of $6,000. That is a good thing, all right? We should be able to objectively say that is a good thing. It doesn't help people who don't have children. It also is kind of a Band-Aid. It applies very selectively. If you don't have a newborn, but you do have 2 to 5 children, you get $3,600, a $3,600 tax credit. It's somewhat helpful. It's somewhat helpful. It's like a tax return. It's as in terms of its helpfulness. How helpful is it? It is comparable to how helpful a tax return is. But it's not actually, remember what the question is, and this is why she's so long-winded. This is why all candidates do that. You have forgotten what exactly the question was. She's not addressing cost of living at this point. That's not addressing the cost of living. That's helping you cope with the cost of living for a couple months. That's what that is. Anyway, there's that. And then, so she hangs her hat on two things. That, in her answer, it's that, and then the $50,000 for a $50,000 small business tax break, or tax deduction. She says, I believe were her exact words. And it should also be mentioned that these have to be new small businesses. So this does nothing for the small business you have that has been around for a while already before. And again, this is helping a small business, but like the cost of living is what we're asking you about, not the cost of starting a business. That's the problem, because there's a lot of people who aren't starting a business and aren't parenting children, and the two things you mentioned did nothing to help them. Now, I will say that her plan, I don't, as far as I recall, she did not mention this, but her plan has been explained online by her campaign, that her plan does mention a $25,000 tax credit for new homeowners, which is billed as, this is something that they're billing as a way to help people lower the barrier to entry, the barrier for entry to home ownership. But again, it's like you either can afford home ownership or not, and this barely moves the needle on that, honestly. It doesn't make a huge difference. And again, life just needs to be continually more affordable. Let's address the elephant in the room. What she's not talking about is wage stagnation. She doesn't want to deal with that. She doesn't want to deal with wage stagnation, and in general, the Democratic Party doesn't have much in the way of solutions for that problem. People don't earn enough to live a reasonable lifestyle, and that's really the issue. And people feel like they are being coerced into accepting less and less and less as what should qualify as a reasonable lifestyle. She wants to focus it on the cost of housing. And that's why she acknowledged it that way, which was kind of twisting the question.
Video's camera angle created the illusion of a large crowd, but a photo of the scene reveals that she was in a room that wasn't particularly large. She admitted that home ownership is out of reach for far too many Americans right now, meaning 2024, the last year of her being Vice President of the United States. When she says far too many, that could also mean that she is admitting that a particular number of people should never be able to own a home. I wonder who she's referring to.
Keep in mind, there's 44 million people living in apartments, which is like 13% of the population. To give you some context on that, that's the same size as it's roughly the same size as the so-called African American population. It's also more than the entire population of Canada. She's not addressing you guys. She's not doing anything to address you guys, especially if you don't have children. So yeah, that's an issue. But after she says these things, she goes on offense. She pivots toward the offensive. And I do want to make note of the fact that she was kind of hemming and hawing through this. So where you hear some liberals saying that Kamala Harris performed pretty well in the debate, she was mediocre at best. And she pivots kind of clumsily here to going on offense to kind of attack Trump by saying that he wants tax cuts for billionaires and big corporations that she says will add $5 trillion to America's deficit. $5 trillion to America's deficit. What she calls she also jumps on top of what she calls Trump sales tax. The Democrats are parroting this. You'll hear this term a lot, not just from her, but from Democrats, period. Trump sales tax. And they're talking about, or they might call it Trump's national sales tax. Whenever you hear them talk about a national sales tax, there is no national sales tax that Trump is trying to levy. They're talking about tariffs. And she's saying the national sales tax that he's trying to levy would levy 20% against everyday goods and services for average American consumers. And she's claiming that this would add $4,000 a year to consumer expenses.
First of all, I have no sales tax. That's an incorrect statement. She knows that. We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases. I took in billions and billions of dollars, as you know, from China. In fact, they never took the tariff off because it was so much money they can't. It would totally destroy everything that they've set out to do. We have inflation like very few people have ever seen before, probably the worst in our nation's history. On top of that, we have millions of people pouring into our country from prisons and jails, from mental institutions and insane asylums.
You want to know why Democrats can't stop letting immigrants into this country from south of the border specifically? I'm going to tell you. And I say this as a registered Democratic voter. Listen to me. I'm telling you this as a registered Democratic voter, and I'm telling you this as an indigenous person, as a Creek Indian, as a Cherokee Indian. It's because of white guilt. White guilt has reached a zenith in this land among white liberals that has compelled them to seek catharsis for their wrongs, for their iniquities, for their transgressions, by trying to do right by other immigrants from south of the border and give them things that represent an unjust generosity. Why is it unjust? It's unjust because you have yet to make good. You have yet to reconcile with the Indians whom you wronged when you got here and the Africans whom you dragged across the water when you came. And I represent them both. And I can tell you indefatigably all day, every day, until you reconcile, you will not be doing the right thing. This isn't the right thing. You are funneling all of these resources, including billions and billions of dollars, $150.7 billion, if I'm not mistaken, per year, into immigration, into dealing with immigration. But there's still no reparations. And the land is still not belonging to the people who it originally belonged to. You're not reconciling at all with the people who were already here. You're an immigrant. And you empathize with the immigrants that you bring here across the border. That's why you treat them the way you treat them. That's why you do what you do for them. You do it because you have empathy for them. And I understand your empathy. I understand it. And it's not poorly placed. It's well placed. I get it. And many of them are coming from unfortunate situations, and you want to help them because of the empathy you feel for them. You empathize with their plight, so you want to do something to help them. Many of you came here from famine yourself. Many of you came here from persecution yourself. But the fact of the matter remains, you're not in a position to help them because you're already in debt to someone else. Me. You're in debt to me. And until you pay your debts to me, you cannot go out here and give loans to someone else. When you owe somebody. So you can't pay nobody but me. Till you pay me, you can't pay nobody else. And here's a Newsweek source. There's an ongoing border crisis that saw 5,000 illegal aliens being released. This is Newsweek reporting. An ongoing border crisis that saw 5,000 illegal aliens being released into the United States per day in December of last year is a microcosm of a much larger issue as President Joe Biden aims to recapture the White House in a crucial election year. This was published, in February of this year. So this was near the beginning of the year. And the very next sentence says, the issue is a $150.7 billion one, shared between federal and state governments, and that's just 1 year. Trump's blaming the Biden administration, and Democrats can't stand the conservative stance against immigration. They feel like it's hypocritical, which it is, but they also feel that it's callous and racist and xenophobic. and all of these things. And that's why the woke thing to do is to bring in all of these immigrants and be kind to them and give money to them and pay for their health care and their stay for up to a year and all of these things. If they get that refugee status, let's make it easier for them to get that refugee status too. And listen. All of that is problematic. It's just you working through your guilt on what you did. The healthiest way to do that would be to pursue truth and reconciliation with the Indians and Africans whom you wronged. That's the point. In any case, Kamala Harris, she comes in with her rebuttal to on the affairs pursuant to the economy that Trump addressed. Because he was really pivoting hard to hit all her weak spots. That's how the whole immigration thing even got brought up. But we're not really supposed to be on that. But he did do a good job of making it relevant. And to be fair, we've seen the figures. It does cost the country a lot. But of course, he was actually reaching. He just did a very good job of connecting the two. But it technically it's not relevant, and so she's back on the whole economy. She says, let's look at where Donald Trump left us, and one of the things that she said, this is about how the Biden administration had to come in and inherit a bad situation from the Trump administration. That's her argument. Biden and Harris had to inherit a bad situation, a bad circumstance from Trump and Pence. And so that's her rebuttal. And she says, quote, Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression. This is not really fair to say because the unemployment rate that Trump inherited from Obama was excellent. And then under Trump, it got even better. It just did. For consecutive years, it got better. The difference maker was the pandemic. And Kamala Harris knows that. She's misleading you again. She is deliberately, have you noticed that this is just her tactic? She says things that are technically true, but besides the point. And the important part that she leaves out makes all the difference. And she's doing it to mislead you on purpose. And that is a Democratic Party thing to do. The inauguration and incumbency of a sitting president takes quite a while to mete out its effects on the unemployment rate. There are so many factors that actually contribute to the unemployment rate, and the president can only affect it so much. And the things that they do to affect it take time to manifest in the numbers anyway. Kamala Harris knows all of that too. It doesn't matter. She would like you to believe that Donald Trump and Mike Pence are responsible for unemployment skyrocketing. That's the pandemic effect. And I would like to just go in and on that for just a second, just so we understand what the pandemic effect is. The pandemic effect is a microcosm of what I call the Jonah effect, for those of you who know scripture. And before even explaining what that is, we need to go, as Black Hebrew Israelites always do, we need to revert to Devarim Eshrim Shmoneh. And if we look at verses 58 through 61, you'll understand what I'm talking about. It reads, if thou wilt not observe to do all the words of this law that are written in this book, that thou mayest fear this glorious and fearful name, Yahweh Elohim, then Yahweh will make thy plagues wonderful, and the plagues of thy seed, even great plagues, and of long continuance, and sore sicknesses, and of long continuance. Moreover, he will bring upon thee all the diseases of Mitzrayim, which is Egypt, which thou wast afraid of, and they shall cleave unto thee. Also every sickness and every plague, which is not written in the book of this law, them will Yahweh bring upon thee until thou be destroyed. If you know anything about that chapter, you understand why Black Hebrew Israelites keep going to that chapter. It's about all the curses that need to be fulfilled on Israel. All of these are prophetic. That whole chapter is prophetic, and Israel has to fit the template of all of those curses. It's a big thing. I'm doing a video on it coming up. I've already done some content about it, but I'm going to be doing something, taking a different approach in a video coming up soon. But this part is about plagues and and pestilence, and there's more that I could say from Ezekiel, who also prophesies of the same thing. I'm not going to go into it because again, I'm going to cover these things in future videos. But the point is this: these curses are reserved for Yisrael, what you call Yisrael or Israel, and yet you suffer these curses because of, again, what I call the Jonah effect, because we have been scattered all over the world. There's nowhere that you don't find people who look just like me. And the reason for that is because of the slave trade, which was also prophesied in that same chapter. And so we were moved around by the transatlantic slave trade and by the Arab slave trade before that. And in all the places that you go, you find us. And wherever we are, these curses have to fall upon us. And when you step into our sphere, because you messing with us, you then incur these same curses. You have made yourself our neighbor. And by virtue of being our neighbor, by being on the same ship with Jonah, the people who were traveling to Tarshish were suddenly struck by this crazy storm and did not realize until it was almost too late that the thing they needed to do was get rid of Jonah. They needed to cast him out. They needed to eject him from the ship as quickly as possible. And it was Jonah who had to tell them that, which is why I'm telling you. What you don't recognize is that the world is suffering, because no matter where you go, we're all over the world and curses are following us. There's more there's more on that in future videos. And I've explained where COVID falls into the scheme of things with that. This is not a video about proving we are the Israelites, though. So if you're wondering, like, well, that doesn't make you Israelites. No, it does not. And that's not what I'm arguing. I'm not going to make that argument in this video. I make it frequently on this channel, though, and in a variety of ways. So I'm not concerned about it. Don't worry. If you don't believe in all of that, don't worry about it. Anyway, the next thing she said was Donald Trump left us the worst public health epidemic in a century. Once again, she's blaming Trump for the pandemic. Like, I mean, this is nothing. Now, granted, the Trump administration did not handle the pandemic well, but you can't blame Trump for the pandemic. That doesn't make any sense. She says these things, and then she immediately goes on a preemptive strike against Project 2025. She starts lambasting Project 2025. If you haven't heard of Project 2025, Project 2025 is this thing that the GOP came up with to show everybody, to consolidate their base around this set of ideas that they say this is what Trump's going to do when he gets in office, and it's not necessarily true. And I hope conservative voters are aware of this. If you're a conservative voter, you need to know that if you're voting for Trump because you think he's going to uphold the promises of Project 2025, Donald Trump immediately disavowed Project 2025 as soon as Kamala Harris even said this. His rebuttal came right up, and the first thing he did was disavow Project 2025.
Number one, I have nothing to do, as you know, and as she knows better than anyone, I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it. This was a group of people that got together. They came up with some ideas. I guess some good, some bad, but it makes no difference.
And that's what he said. He's not down with Project 2025. He's not. He claims he now listen. Maybe he's just saying that. But how do you feel about a president who just says stuff?
Joe Biden stated their Project 2025 and not Trump's Project 2025. It's obvious that he's reading from a teleprompter. So this means that he did not write the script that he is regurgitating out loud to the audience. These statements are coming from somebody we won't ever see in the forefront. But does this rule out that Trump is not involved in or supports this Project 2025 proposal? Rumors began spreading across the internet about Project 2025. With the help of some news media channels, social media memes from bot accounts, and websites owned and operated by Democratic Party affiliates, America was under the impression that Trump not only endorsed Project 2025, but was actively involved. The Heritage Foundation takes full credit for creating Project 2025.
Already we have shown the power of our winning formula, working closely with many of the great people at Heritage.
How do you know when he means what he says and when he doesn't? You know, we got that same problem with Donald Trump on abortion now. I don't know how. We're not going into that in this video. We're not tackling that question in this video. If I do a follow-up video, that's definitely going to be one of the first things that we deal with. But then he went on to defend himself. He's on defense now, once again. She keeps putting him on defense. She did a good job of continually doing that, even though she's not doing a good job of saying what she's saying. She's not doing a good job of making her actual points. But anyway, he's on his back foot again, and he defends himself on the whole pandemic thing, saying that it was a historic pandemic effect unlike anything seen since 1917. Well, I mean, for the most part, yeah, that's true. And he has the right to say that because it was historic and it was something that he really had no legitimate control over. Her statements were just not factual, and so he then proceeds to say we did a phenomenal job with the pandemic. That's not really true, but he's citing his administration producing ventilators for the entire world and national mask distribution. Things nobody thought possible. Everybody thought it possible. Everybody was ahead of you on that. Everybody thought it needed to be done faster than you did it, actually. But whatever. He then claimed that his administration left the Democrats, left Biden with, quote, a country where the economy and where the stock market was higher than it was before the pandemic came in. Which, the stock market, it was higher. And the economy was higher. We had a high economy, according to former President Trump. So there's nothing you can argue with that because it's not a statement that makes sense. So I'm not gonna deal with it. Anyway, he goes into his plan and he pledges to cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy. That's a quote. Cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy. This is a Republican thing to do. Create a great economy. How? By cutting taxes very substantially. Which does sound like a great way to actually improve the cost of living, perhaps. Maybe. If you cut taxes for the people who are actually suffering the effects of such an arduous and heavy cost of living. Let's be clear. I'm not going to go into this in detail right now because we don't have time. But Paul Ryan's tax plan or whatever turned out to be not at all accomplishing that.